Okay, so on.
All right. Hello, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buongiorno. Today we begin a series of online lectures. The first part of which happened in 2019 on art history of related to Italian masters, and Dr. Reshma Nayyar had conducted that very, very popular session. This time, on account of that popularity, and because we have now with us the new director of the Italian Cultural Center, Francesca Amendola, we have proffered for all of you here 6 lectures which form a series on illusionism in Italian ceiling paintings. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this program. And I will request Francesca Amendola to kindly welcome the participants and our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anupam. I'm so glad to be here. This is, I have to tell you, my first event in India, co-organized by the Italian Cultural Center in Mumbai and the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. And I am very glad that my first event is with such an important institution. Let me just introduce myself. My name, as maybe you did also, Dr. Anupam. My name is Francesca Amendola. I'm really very new in Mumbai, and I'm so excited to be here and I look forward to all the events the Italian Cultural Center can organize to promote Italian culture together with all the wonderful Indian institutions. And this is the perfect occasion to start for me on this series on illusionism in Italian ceiling paintings, held by Dr. Reshma Nayyar. Well, this is, we are online. We are online, we know, because of the pandemic. We are not in presence. But let me remember something we know, that culture, art, and beauty is so essential. And in these times, even more than before, because it helps us to keep us connected between people. And it keeps us connected also with our deep soul, with our deep values. So I think these Saturdays with Dr. Reshma will be really important for us, and also beautiful and nice to follow. So I look forward to follow all these lessons. And so I'm glad to launch also, together with the museum, this series on this first lesson on 2 masterpieces, very, very famous masterpieces of the Italian Renaissance frescoes, which is the Andrea Montanya Camera degli Sposi and the Giulio Romano Sala dei Giganti. Let me give back the floor to Dr. Anupam Sah, who is the head of the art conservation and research and training of the museum.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you indeed. And before I introduce Reshma Nayyar, I must take a moment to thank Signora Costanza, who was the Consulate General at Mumbai. And it was she who initiated this program, and very, very grateful to her and to her team. And also to Mr. Mukherjee, because it was Mr. Mukherjee and Signora Costanza, they got together and said, let's begin this collaboration and let the 2 countries know each other even better. They're both ancient civilizations, and they both have a rich heart. Thank you to all of you. And Reshma, you're a specialist in Baroque art, and you've done your doctorate in art history from Rutgers University, where you also taught courses in art history and expository writing. While Reshma's research focuses on modern Italy, related to art in early modern Italy, she has also studied European and American art in New York City area museums, including at the New York Historical Society. Reshma, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Anupam. Okay, I'm just going to begin with
a few lines on the series as to each lecture is a standalone lecture, but to understand how illusionistic techniques developed and actually spread across Europe, there are certain key monuments that give us wonderful points of reference. And those are the ones that I have picked for the series. So each lecture covers usually more than one ceiling, but there are a couple of them that just focus on one. Today's is on two ceiling paintings in Mantua. And I'm just going to open the presentation and then start with the images. Okay. Let me see if I can move this away. Okay. So the first thing I want to say, for those of you who might not be familiar with the Italian language, the artist Andrea Montanya, his last name, if you speak Hindi, this is how it's written. Mantegna. Okay.
Sorry, just a second. Reshma, have you
Yes.
shared your screen?
Probably not. Just one second.
Yeah.
Okay, just one moment. Okay.
Okay, great. Perfect. I can see your screen now.
All right. Okay. So as I was saying, the Italian artist Andrea Montanya, for those of you who speak Hindi, this is how you pronounce his name, his last name, Mantegna. The two artists we'll be talking about today, Andrea Montanya and Giulio Romano. It's one of those odd things that we refer to Andrea Montanya as Mantegna by his last name, and Giulio Romano as Giulio by his first name. So that's Giulio. Okay. Both the works we're going to look at are in the city of Mantua, which is located in the north of Italy in the Lombardy region, and was ruled by the Gonzaga family for several centuries. So the Gonzaga came to power in the 14th century and were ousted very early in the 18th century, like within 10 years of the 18th century starting. So two of the key rulers, the ones most important to us today, are the ones who commissioned the works we're looking at. The first was Marchese Ludovico II, Ludovico II, so the Marquis Ludovico II, and the second was his great-grandson Federico II. Now, originally, when the Gonzaga came to power, they had the rank of captain. Eventually, they were raised from captains to marquis. And in 1530, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V raised their rank even further by making Federico II the Duke of Mantua. Okay. Now, here's a map of Mantua on the right. And what you see on the upper right, this complex is called the Ducal Palace Complex. Now, it's called the Ducal Palace ever since 1530. Before that, the same family used it. They just didn't have the title of Duke. So at the time that we're talking about, when the Camera degli Sposi was painted, it was not called the Ducal Palace. It was called the Palace Complex. And within the Palace Complex, there is this square castle fortified structure called the Castello di San Giorgio. And it is in the Castello di San Giorgio within this complex that the room that we're looking at is located. also, at the time that this, the Andrea Montanya painted the Camera degli Sposi, this was the limit of the city. Everything else was in the outskirts. So it was much later that the grandson of the Marquis, so it's Federico II, who built the Palazzo del Te on what was at the time a marshy area on the outskirts of Mantua. Okay? The Marquis of Mantua, Federico, I beg your pardon, Ludovico II, invited Andrea Montanya to come to Mantua and become his court artist. This was in the late 1450s, so the middle of the 15th century. And Mantegna eventually agreed. And as court artist, his duties included basically everything. It wasn't just painting. It was also designing and creating pageant-related material. So anything that the Duke wanted, he would turn to Mantegna. Mantegna was treated very, very well by the Duke. He was esteemed very highly by the Duke, and he actually worked for 3 generations of the Gonzaga family. The most important commission that Mantegna undertook for the Gonzaga family and during the reign of Ludovico II was what is called the Camera degli Sposi. So that is the room that I've marked with a yellow rectangle in the Castello di San Giorgio. And at the lower left of the screen, you see an interior view of the room. Now, this room is called by 4 different names. Sometimes it's called the Camera degli Sposi, sometimes it's called the Camera Pitta, sometimes the Camerino, and sometimes the Camerino degli Sposi. It's actually very simple. The word camera in Italian simply means room. Camera degli Sposi, loosely translated and not very accurately in terms of its subject matter is, so Camera degli Sposi means bridal chamber. And that suggests that it was a bedroom or it was commissioned to commemorate a marriage, but more likely than not, this is not the case. So when I say that bridal chamber is not the best, most accurate description of this room, I'll explain why. This room, when it was built, it took Mantegna about 10 years to decorate it. We'll look at details and you will understand why it took that long. It served as a formal reception room. So it was where affairs of state were carried on. It was where the Marchese and his wife, Barbara of Brandenburg, welcomed their most important official visitors. And the reason it's called the Camera degli Sposi is because of its dedication to the couple who commissioned it, Ludovico II and Ludovico il Secondo and his wife, Barbara of Brandenburg. Okay. It's also called the Camera Pitta, the painted room, for obvious reasons. I'll point out here that almost everything you see in the interior view is painted. We'll go into that in detail very shortly, but let me just mark out a couple of things that are not painted, that are actually physically protruding from the walls. So on the right side, there's this fireplace, okay? So the frame of the fireplace protrudes from the wall. This door and the lintel and brackets above it protrude from the wall, okay? And you can't see it very clearly. Let me see if I can zoom in. These bracket-like structures that are at the top of the pilasters, these protrude. I'll show you a detail later, so you'll get a sense of it. For now, let's just get back to the terms used to refer to this room. So The Camerino is a diminutive. It just means little room, and Camerino degli Sposi, the little room of the married couple. Okay. This ceiling, okay? In this room, just like in the Hall of the Giants that we'll look at later, it's very difficult. In fact, it would not be right to analyze only the ceilings without considering the walls beneath, because they are meant to be one unit. They're meant to be read together, and they are meant to be experienced together. So on the lower right, you have a view of the room that shows you almost completely three of the walls, and there's one wall behind us. So if you're standing where the photographer was, there'd be a wall behind you. Now, the interesting thing for me is that when you look at these walls, the wall on the left has a decoration, the wall in front of you has a decoration, the wall on the right seems to be just painted a yellowish gold. And I'm telling you this, and we'll look at pictures later, that the wall that would be behind us is very similar to the wall on the right with this yellowish gold. And this is intentional. That yellowish gold color is not meant to represent a wall, because if you look very, very closely, this is not the best image, but I hope you can kind of see these straight lines, and the yellow gold edges are not even. They're not as straight as those lines, because the fiction, the painted illusion here is that there are curtain rods on which are hung these yellow gold colored curtains. Now, the Gonzaga were known to have in their possession some very fancy, I think, leather curtains from Spain. So there's a good probability that these represent either those curtains or similar, very luxurious curtains. And we'll look at other images which are much better, but I want you to just notice that a similar fiction exists here. And above this scene, so above the fireplace, there's a scene which we'll look at in a moment. It's as if the curtain has been pulled aside. And you can't tell right now, but the same thing is happening here, where the pointer is. And we'll look at much better images very soon. But for now, I want you to get a sense of what the entire room looks like. Okay, now the ceiling. So if you start, or I'm sorry, let's just go back to the walls, and let's start from ground level of the wall that's right in front of us, the one with the fireplace. So right to either side of the fireplace, you see what looks like colored marbles or colored stone tiles that have been placed from the floor up a couple of feet. In reality, that's just painted, because you know everything is painted except for the few things that I pointed out. Above that, the fiction is that there's a staircase and a kind of platform, and there are people over there. Okay. There are, on the left wall, if you look, it's a little clearer. So if you look to the left of the central door, above this apparently stone tile course, there are apparently pilasters, okay? And the dimensions of the room are about 8 meters by 8 meters approximately, and it's about 7 meters high. So it's almost cubic in shape. Now, above this, you have the pilaster. The top of the pilaster, this part, just these impost block-like things, these are three-dimensional and they protrude. Okay? And above each painted panel, there's a lunette shape that is also painted. There have been some losses in these areas, but most of these have Gonzaga emblems and coat of arms. And above that, so now if you look at the image on the left, you'll get a sense of what's happening in the ceiling. So these are the lunettes at the bottom. And then you have what look like ribs across the vault with an opening to the sky. Okay, a couple of things to keep in mind over here. The shape of the ceiling, the actual physical shape is a slight curve, okay? But the way it has been painted is to emphasize that curve and make it look much more spherical in nature than it actually is. In addition, there is a fictive oculus. The word oculus is Latin for eye. And if you've been to the Pantheon in Rome, you know exactly what that means, because at the center of the Pantheon, there's a hole in the roof and you can see the sky. Okay, so that's what the illusion is over here, that there's a hole in the center of the ceiling from which you can see the sky and other things, and we'll look at the details. But I want you to note what's happening around the oculus. So immediately around the oculus, you see, I can zoom in a bit, you have leaves and fruit, okay, arranged in a circle. And on the outer part of the around the oculus, you have fictive representations of 8 Roman emperors. We know exactly which Roman emperors they are because they are, I beg your pardon, they are labeled. Okay, so there's no ambiguity about what is depicted in those roundels. Now, as I mentioned, these portions which are located right at the top of the painted pilasters, these are 3-dimensional. They protrude. This part protrudes, and this part protrudes. Okay? Everything else you see is painted. And of course, there is actually a window over here. Okay? The decoration that you see around the oculus and above the lunettes. So here you have the lunettes. At the bottom left, you see 3 of them. And right above the central lunette, you have a pendentive shaped area which has paintings which are, again, illusionistic. Now, there are 2 words that are really important here, and I'm going to go with the second one first. It's a French phrase, trompe l'œil. It just means deceive the eye. So it could apply to any medium that is illusionistically renders a different medium. So here the medium of paint is being used to depict sculpture. So it's a fictive relief. This looks like it would be a stucco or even marble relief, but actually it's just paint. And here in this triangular area, the fiction is that there are gold-colored mosaic tiles in the background, and there's a 3-dimensional low relief in the foreground. And I think this is Hercules with the lion's skin. So let's just look at this a little closer. All of this is paint. Look at this part, where the paint is made to resemble architectural moldings. Trompe l'œil, it deceives the eye. It is all painting. The other word that you see, grisaille, comes from, again, French. Gris means gray. So it is painting in, it's monochromatic painting. It's not always gray, usually gray. no matter which color it is, it's called grisaille. So monochromatic painting that imitates sculpture, usually low relief sculpture, is called grisaille. So a great example would be this little winged puto over here, who is depicted holding up a reed in which the image of Caesar is. So this kind of an image, which is in a roundel, it evokes several, other than the subject being from antiquity, from classical antiquity, it's a Roman emperor. It also evokes coinage, although on coinage, the images are usually in strict profile. But the whole application of paint in a way that suggests very strongly that the decoration is three-dimensional is illusionistic. The entire ceiling. Now just let's look at the ceiling again. So you know that everything you're looking at in the image on the left is painted. Okay? Other than the slight curvature of the vault, everything is paint. So the shadows that you see are painted. Okay? The parts that appear to be protruding, they don't protrude. It's just paint. And the level of illusionism actually goes much further than this. And we'll talk about how that happens. Okay, here's a close-up of the oculus. Now, the fiction that we're looking at, and remember, for those of you who are viewing this on a mobile device, I would actually encourage you to lift your device up above your head and look up, because that's how you'll get the ideal desired view. For those of us who are looking at it on a laptop screen, imagine that. Imagine you're looking up at this. So now when you're looking up, you're in this room, a very, very formal reception room. And when you look up, you see an open sky. It's illusionistic. And you start looking at details. And what do you see? Well, you see a lot of little cherubs, winged putti, who are standing along a balustrade. Some of them, now I don't know which would be inside and outside the balustrade. I'm just going to go with the ones that we can see completely are inside the balustrade, and the ones that are outside, for example, this one, whose body is behind the balustrade and is leaning forward. They're not really engaged with us. They're doing whatever they want. It's very whimsical. First of all, putti don't exist. Even if they existed, it's unlikely they'd be standing. Well, they can fly, so maybe they'd be standing there. But so it's illusionistic even in the sense of intermingling the imagined with the real, because the people you see here are actual people. Some of them have been identified. You see another thing, you see a peacock, and I assume there may be a question. I'm going to say right now, I have no idea what this thing in the center is. If anybody else, I would be very grateful for that information. The other thing you see is a very disconcerting large flower pot balanced precariously on the edge of the balustrade. So there's a stick, a staff that's being placed to support it so that it doesn't topple in, but that staff doesn't look very sturdy. There is a real danger that any real flower pot positioned in that manner would topple inwards onto the spectator, onto you as you look up. Look at this little puto, okay, the one who has a fruit in his hand. A little toddler, okay, holding a fruit, not from the bottom, but from the top. what are the chances that's going to fall? And if it does fall, where is it going to fall? It's going to fall on you, the viewer. It might fall on you, the viewer. You need to be careful. Okay, look at what's happening with the Puto next to him. Okay, so this is not, I have another image where you'll see it a little better. So this Puto who's sticking his face out of one of the apertures in the balustrade is actually being pushed down, his head. The hand of the standing Puto is on the head of this little Puto whose head is out. So there's a lot of naughtiness being depicted, and in a way, this element of playfulness is Mantegna's incorporating into his illusionism, into the illusionism of this very serious paint decoration of a formal reception room, an aspect of whimsicalness. Okay? And this room, his decoration of the room was highly, highly appreciated and praised. There is a lot of correspondence of the time that talks about it. So people who traveled to Mantua were requested for descriptions when they went back to wherever they came from, and they were asked about it. They were, people wanted to visit. There's one of the sources calls it the most beautiful room in the world, and I should mention here that in ancient sources that the humanists read in this time, and for instance, in courts like those of Mantua, there were references to, illusionistically painted rooms in antiquity. And Mantegna's creation of a room that is entirely decorated with illusionistic painting is the first such creation since classical antiquity. And there are some similar works that we can see now in Pompeii, but Pompeii at that time was not visible. So it is quite possible Mantegna, who is very interested in antiquity, actually conceptualized this entire thing by himself. He did not have a model other than maybe some written descriptions of ancient rooms. Okay, the oculus. So if you're visited the Pantheon in Rome, you know that this image upper right is distorted because the interior is perfectly hemispherical. Okay, so the image is flattened in this photograph. Here's an exterior view at the lower right of the Pantheon. Don't confuse the shape that you see on the outside with what's in the inside, because the outside includes a lot of reinforcement. So the outside looks like a gentle dome, but the inside is a perfectly hemispherical dome. Now, the point I want to make here is that in the Camera degli Sposi, the ceiling has a light curve. So just to make it very simple, the curve inside the Camera degli Sposi might actually be something like this. But because of the illusionism, and remember again that when we take photographs of large spaces that are, the camera distorts the shapes and the dimensions. And over here, the camera has, in a way, flattened what you see. It would actually, the illusion would make the ceiling look more hemispherical. Okay. So here are close-ups of the two parts that I told you about. And here you can actually see his skulls kind of sticking out like mine. The flower pot, it is a very real possibility for a spectator looking up that something like that could topple over. Okay. when, as a spectator, and again, not again, I should have mentioned this right at the outset, try to place yourself into society pre-electricity, pre-photographs, pre-internet, okay? So you don't, the images that you see are very few. It is what you physically go and see. And if you are wealthy enough to have some paintings, access to actual paintings, and maybe manuscripts, you'd be even more wealthy, and printed images. Okay, that's what you're restricted to actually seeing. And then if you're fortunate enough to enter a room like this, okay, that is covered in very naturalistic looking illusionistic painting, the experience is very different than for people like us who are habituated in a way to seeing all kinds of illusions and painting. We're used to 3D movies, virtual reality, all of this, color images all over the place. Whereas here, it's something that is rare and exceptional. And then now when you look at the details, so you have this very lifelike looking puto holding up this fruit that might drop on your head, okay? This flower pot that might fall into this space. The experience is heightened. There's a sense of immediacy and a sense that you are impacted by the space. You're not just a passive spectator, you're an active viewer. And this is really important when you consider aspects of illusionism in painting. Okay, now in the Camera degli Sposi, the illusionism is achieved by in various ways. Okay, so some of the most straightforward are the coordinated decoration of the walls and the ceiling. So you actually have the proportions and the subject matter coordinated between wall and ceiling. It's not that the wall is decorated and there's something totally different happening on the ceiling. It's as if everything is happening together, okay? The color, the calculated shading, we saw that in the grisaille, a very good example in the grisaille details. Trompe-l'œil and grisaille we talked about. Mathematical perspective. So there's a use of, you know, if you look at the balustrade and these, the lines over here, right? You can be sure that if you extend these lines, they will all meet perfectly in the center, because there is an underlying mathematical grid according to which the composition is laid out. This foreshortening and the sotto in su perspective, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then there are other things that enhance the illusionism. For example, this fiction of these curtains. So these so-called blank walls, it's wrong to call them blank walls, they're not blank. They're curtains that are drawn shut. And over here, the scenes that you see are because the curtains have been drawn aside to allow you to see them. And there's the placement of the flower pot and also the appearance of what you know is not real, cannot be real, being putti amidst recognizable human figures, which we'll look at in just a moment. Now, I want to talk about Mantegna's technique over here. So these are two works by Mantegna, two altarpieces. And then just focus on the body of Christ. Okay, so this is Christ after he has been taken down from the cross. His body is lifeless, okay? And just focus on the pose of Christ. All right. On the right is another painting by Mantegna in which the viewer's perspective is completely different. So you're not looking straight at the body. The viewer is implied as being standing before a bed or some kind of slab on which Christ's body is arranged, and Christ's body is foreshortened. So if you look, let's say Christ was about, I don't know, 5'8", 5'10", okay. very proportional depiction of the body in the left two images. Over here, the part that is further away from you is shortened to give the illusion of the body receding from the picture plane back into space. So we know how interested Mantegna was in foreshortening, and this work was created after the Camerino degli Sposi, the one on the right, but it is a great example of the use of foreshortening and the importance of foreshortening to Mantegna's composition. Now, a difference that must be made is between di sotto in su and foreshortening. Di sotto in su is an Italian term that simply means from below above. So in art history, it means a composition that is designed to be viewed as if the viewer were looking, the viewer positioned down were looking up, okay? And di sotto in su has to have foreshortening, because if you look up at something, the figure or whatever object it is appears foreshortened, okay? So the difference is both these details have foreshortening in them. But di sotto in su, the arrangement of the figure is such as if it is placed above you. Now, in this specific case, we know it is placed above us because it appears in the fictive oculus of the Camerino degli Sposi. Another very important thing that Mantegna did, so here's one of his altarpieces that was more traditional. And traditional in the sense, I just say in the center you have Saint Mark, above him you have Christ, the Virgin Mary, and Saint John the Evangelist, and other saints on the sides. Each saint is in his or her own little niche, and they are of different different proportions. So if Saint Mark, who is in the center, stood up, he would tower over everybody else. He'd literally be a giant. These four saints who are standing on the lower register are a certain proportion, more or less the same as the four saints above them, but the three central figures on top are much smaller in proportion. Okay. Mantegna created also the altarpiece on the right. It's called the San Zeno altarpiece. And it's very, very important because it was the first, it represents the first attempt, or I don't want to say attempt, it's the first instance of a unified space with proportional figures within it. So look at the difference. Here, each saint is in his own niche or compartment. Here, there are divisions in the form of these columns, engaged columns, or freestanding columns, I can't tell, engaged columns. But the illusion is that this architecture continues at the back, and there's a squarish courtyard or room within which there's a throne on which the Virgin is seated with the child on her lap, and there are saints arrayed along the lateral edges. Okay. The proportions of the figures relate to each other in a very coherent manner. The space depicted is very rational and believable. And here's this is just a very beautiful image which gives you a sense of the altarpiece in situ within the church where it was commissioned. And now when you look at the room here, you realize that Mantegna is doing something similar. Okay? He is conceiving of the walls of the room as a unified space along with the ceiling, and he has decorated it accordingly. Now, there's one more important part about the fiction of the space that I want to point out. Let's assume he painted, let's assume there were actual curtains here, okay, everywhere, on all these, each of the three panels of all four walls, okay. And now let's assume that the right wall and the wall behind us the curtains stay as they are, okay? But we draw aside this curtain. You can see it drawn aside here. See, the curtain is drawn aside. Here there is a curtain, but there are figures in front of the curtain. And if you look on the left, this area, so this is the panel above the door on the left wall. Look at this curtain, painted curtain, as if, so all that you see in blue, the reverse is blue, and I assume the front would have been the same yellow gold. And it's as if it's been drawn aside and placed over the lintel of the door, okay? But it's just paint. And what do you see when the curtain is drawn aside? You see the outdoors, you see the landscape, you see standing on this ledge, putti, carrying an inscription. Okay. Before we start looking at the walls, I want to mention this. The fiction, the illusion that Mantegna has created here is not of a physical room inside a castle or inside the palace. He has created the fiction of a structure, a pavilion that is outdoors. So the kind of shamiana-like structure we often use during weddings or celebrations of holy festival, things like that. You erect a shamiana outdoors, and if you have curtains and you draw them aside, and you're standing inside the shamiana, that's the kind of structure that fictively Andrea Montanya has created inside this room. Okay. Now on the north wall, the main wall, you have the patron, Ludovico II, and his wife, Barbara of Brandenburg, their children, and their courtiers. Okay? There's even the family dog here. I want you to notice something. Eye level is assumed to be over here because you can't see the top of the stairs. Okay? And there seems to be some kind of carpet. Illusionistically, there's a carpet painted here, and that carpet over here falls down the side, the edge falls down the side of the wall. Here's a better image. You can see the dog more clearly. And here you can see the curtains really well. Okay, so let's focus here first. The curtain here is drawn aside to allow us to see this scene of the Marchese, his wife, and their children and their courtiers. And over here, the curtain is drawn, but there are courtiers standing in front of it. So when you think of the two walls that just have the curtains, so that photograph I showed you with three walls, the wall on the right and the wall that you know is behind you, where it's just the gold. I just don't have good details of detailed images, but you have to visualize that actually in the room, this is what all three panels on each of the walls look like. Okay. The other wall with narrative imagery is this one. It has a central door. Above it, you have an inscription being carried by the putti, and you have a scene with some with a horse, a hunting dog, I guess, dogs, and members of the, I guess the employees of the court. And on the right, you have what is called the meeting scene. Okay, we'll look at details. The meeting panel, this again is the patron, Ludovico II. This is his son, Francesco, who is made a cardinal. Okay? This figure on the right is Frederick III, the Holy Roman Emperor. He never visited Mantua. He had come to Italy. He was crowned in Italy. He was the last of the Holy Roman Emperors to be crowned in Rome by the Pope. And this figure is King Christian I of Denmark, who was married to the sister of Barbara of Brandenburg. So he's the brother-in-law of Ludovico II's wife, Barbara of Brandenburg. Okay. This is Ludovico's other son. I don't remember his name, his children, and I think another son. The background. Okay. The landscape background, I've put two images. That's why you see that odd line here. I just want you to notice that there's a very detailed depiction of ancient Roman structures dotting the landscape. None of these structures actually exist in the landscape around Mantua. So this is Andrea Montagna's interest in antiquity manifesting itself in the painting. Very quickly, let me just show you. This is the Arch of Janus in Rome. It's a four-faced arch. So you have something similar here in the center. This is the Pyramid of Caius Cestius in Rome. You have a similar pyramid over here. And on the left is a porphyry basin in the Vatican museums. And over here, you see a basin, a large, probably a marble basin. But you also see a structure that looks like the aqueduct remains that you see in Rome. Another structure here that looks like, resembles the Pantheon. I'm sorry, not the Pantheon, the Colosseum. Okay. The inscription. Main thing, it is to the great Ludovico II and his wife, Barbara, the married couple, the glorious, incomparable. Please don't go by my, I'm just giving you a very loose translation, from Andrea Montanya of Padua, who presents this work, and he uses this word tenue, which actually means this slight work. It's a little, it's very courtly in the sense, it's like he creates this magnificent, extraordinary work. And he says, here's this little gift I make to you. Okay, to who? To the great Ludovico and his fabulous wife. So in a way, he's increasing the prestige of his patrons by calling what is a fabulous work of art sort of like a trifling gift. Okay, I'm translating very, very loosely, but I think you get the idea. Okay. Andrea Montanya included a self-portrait over here. I will not go into that. I just want to show you the level of detail here. It's incredible. You miss it. If you don't know where to look, you will not even realize it's there. This, by the way, this blue is the painted curtain from the Puto inscription scene that overlaps the panel, increases the illusionism. Okay, this is an actual bust from Mantegna's funerary chapel, which kind of clarifies that that is definitely a self-portrait of Mantegna. I will just, I wanted to bring this up to show you that this idea of Mantegna, including himself in the foliage, could be related to, I read a very interesting article about how, you know, in Florence, Lorenzo Ghiberti, who created the gates for the baptistry, included, sculpted portraits of himself in the details that were surrounded by, you know, floral wreaths and decorations. Okay. We'll now move on very quickly to the Hall of the Giants, but I wanted to mention, those of you who are in Mumbai, whenever you do go to the CSMVS, I would suggest you look at this painting by Mattia Preti that is Apollo and his Muses. And it's believed that this might be an oil sketch, a preparatory sketch for a ceiling painting. And I assume that's based on these, the fact that it's circular and there are these grisaille figures on the, at the corners. Okay, may or may not be for a ceiling painting. Had the perspective in it been di sotto in su, then there would have been no doubt that it was meant for a ceiling. So I just wanted to contrast these two so that you understand very clearly that the sotto in su, from below above, as if seen from below looking up, is um, is is the use of foreshortening to increase illusionism in figures that are actually painted above the viewer, where the viewer has to look up to see them. Okay, this should reinforce that. So you see this Pluto who's fallen asleep. He's meant to be viewed head on, similar to these figures. You see the dead Christ. We know, despite the foreshortening, that the context tells you that you're looking down at the body of the dead Christ. Whereas the same kind of foreshortening in a context like this, and here, of course, these works are in situ on a ceiling, so there's no doubt you have to look up to see them. But these are visual cues that allow you to judge where a painting was likely to be placed if you have an oil sketch. Okay, now we move on to the Fall of the Giants. I'm just looking at the time. We're not going to spend as much time on the Fall of the Giants, but before we begin, there are a couple of points that I would like to make. The unified space that we saw in Mantegna's work, okay, is taken to an extreme by Giulio Romano. And you'll understand when we look at the images. But before we look at the images, there are two things I want to kind of give you as background. One is the source of the subject matter. Ovid's Metamorphoses has a chapter called The Giants. Okay? The giants attack the Olympians, the Olympian gods led by Zeus. Okay? And to do that, they piled mountains one on top of the others, and they tried to climb that to get to Olympus. And Zeus was having none of it. He hurled a lightning bolt. The mountains came crashing down. They crushed the giants who died. Okay, that's what is being depicted. All right. I'm just going to show you very briefly a painting on a ceiling in Genoa of the Fall of the Giants by a contemporary of Giulio Romano. Okay? So this is it's called the Palazzo del Principe. There's a room in which you have this painting. So this is the center part of the painting. That's Zeus with his thunderbolt. These are the Olympian gods, arrayed on clouds on each side of Zeus. And these are the giants dying. Okay. Now the Palazzo del Te. So Ludovico II's great-grandson, Federico II, called Giulio Romano to Mantua as his court artist. So just as Mantegna was court artist to his great-grandfather, Giulio Romano was his court artist. This area was marshy land, and over here, Giulio Romano designed and built a palace called the Palazzo del Te, where the Gonzaga stables had been. Okay, so this is the layout that he gave the palace. There are many rooms that are decorated within the palace, and this is the location of the Hall of the Giants. Okay. There are many facades to this palace, so there are 4 facades, and then there are the interior facades. I want you to note, I don't have the best images for this, so I just point out what I want you to note. There are certain intentional oddities in the facade. Okay? They don't quite match. So if you look at the lower right, the central entrance, on the left, there's a niche and there's an opening. On the right, there's a niche, but there's a blank closed niche above it. Okay? This is intentional. And it's jarring. And there are lots of things like this that are jarring. So for instance, here you have a detail where these triglyphs seem to be falling down. It's done intentionally, but it it makes you do a double take when you notice it. So similar thing happening here. And over here you can see, central triple arched opening. And then again, you have these open spaces, but they're closed here. Then you have open spaces here and they're closed here. So it doesn't quite make sense and you don't know quite what to make of it. Keep in mind that the Palazzo del Te was a pleasure palace. It was where Federico got away from the city, got away from his wife. It's where he rendezvoused with his mistress. And it was a place for leisure, for pleasure, for basically letting his hair down. And when Giulio Romano decorated it, one of the rooms is the Sala dei Cavalli. So you have portraits of the horses, the prized Gonzaga steeds. So look at this one here. You can just see its, I don't know what you call it, the snout, the face of the horse. And the illusionism from this angle is pretty high. You have Olympian gods in niches alternating with the horses. So this is the room of the horses. There's a room of Psyche where there's a banquet and there are episodes from the story of Cupid and Psyche. Okay? And the Hall of the Giants. Now in the Hall of the Giants, this is a space that is not easy to absorb through images. So let me first ask you to just look at this yellow square over here. So you have a square ground plan, okay? So you have 4 walls, and you can see 2 walls here, 1 and 2, and it has a domed ceiling. And we'll look at the walls and the ceiling. For now, I want you to look at this. The floor. This floor is not original. Okay, the floor is disorienting, but it's still geometric. I will come back to the actual floor in the original floor that Giulio had designed and built in a while after we looked at the details, the rest of the details. So I just remind you about this falling down thing in the facade. And the other thing I would like you to know is the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V actually visited Mantua in 1530 while this room was being decorated. So he saw it. Okay? In 1522, Federico II had been granted as his personal device Mount Olympus. So this is a coin. I found this image online at this website, which actually said, and I have not been able to confirm this, but there's a rare, there are rarer coins of this type that actually have the word Olympus written below the mountain. Okay. Charles V is the one who raised the rank of the Gonzaga family by making Federico Duke. From Marquis, he became Duke. Okay. So when you enter the room, this is the principal image. It's Zeus hurling his thunderbolt. Okay. So you have a ring of clouds. At the 4 corners of the room, you have depictions of the winds, and on the walls, you have giants basically being crushed as the mountains come hurtling down on them. Before we look at details, let me just go through this very quickly. So when you look up, this is what you see. There's Zeus with his thunderbolt. Above Zeus, a throne with an eagle, a balustrade with colonnade and a domed roof, and a canopy above the throne. Okay, some figures between the columns, and Olympian gods all along the base of the dome. Okay. The clouds, the painted clouds overlap with the walls in an irregular manner, and the painting of the walls continues. So there's no demarcation as such between the end of one wall and the start of another. And this enhances the illusion of a continuous space, okay? And you can actually tell by this photograph how, it's a composite photograph because it's difficult to photograph a space like that. Okay. The eagle also appears in the coat of arms of the Holy Roman Emperor, okay? And Olympus is where the gods reside, the Olympian gods, because they reside on Mount Olympus, appeared on Federico II's coinage. There is definitely a political reference in this, in the subject chosen for the room. So Zeus defeating the giants is like the Holy Roman Emperor defeating his enemies, and his ally is Federico II, who commissioned this room. Okay, you can see, here there's a giant who's kind of grasping at some stones. Here there are columns and an arch collapsing because Zeus has hurled his thunderbolt, and the mountains that the giants had placed to climb up to Olympus have come crashing down, and they're dying. Okay? So here you have a good sense of a structure that is collapsing and crushing the giants. Crush giant here. It plays into the oddities that we see on the facade. I'm not saying there's a definite link. All I'm saying is that there seems to have been an attempt to connect the quirkiness of the facade with, well, I won't say connect, but knowledgeable viewers would have made the connection. Especially look at this part. Oops. And that's the same over here. Okay. Other walls. Okay, so now you've seen the four walls. You've seen how the decoration continues. And these are just details of the landscape background. Very, very beautifully done because the scale changes completely, right? I mean, here you're looking at a huge, basically the world tumbling down on the giants. And then when you get here, you see a landscape far away with a city in the background. And I believe it's in some way related to the story, but I don't know exactly how. Okay. I want you to come back to the floor that we talked about earlier. I showed you the image and I told you that that's not the original floor. So what Giulio Romano had designed for the floor was river pebbles placed irregularly along the floor. So first of all, it would have made walking there not the easiest because it would not have been flat. And presumably the pebbles that were closer to the walls would be larger, maybe some boulders. So it kind of made the space of the floor and the walls seamlessly join, just like the ceiling and the walls join seamlessly through the irregular placement of the clouds. And what these are some details of the Olympian gods. I won't go into that. Let me just go back to this image. Yes, the interior. So now you think of yourself in this room, okay? Completely closed off, no windows, okay? Assume the doors are closed. You're surrounded by painting, 360 degrees, literally 360 degrees. Below you, it's like there are pebbles, okay? And the world is crashing down. It takes viewer experience to a level that has, I would say, never been surpassed until, I would think, computer-aided experiences. It's really a fascinating conceptual and very brilliant conceptual composition. It is more than just walls and ceiling being painted with the fall of the giants. It is literally a space that has been created which gives you the experience of an illusion. You are inside a space where the world is crashing down. You're experiencing the story of the fall of the giants. And contemporary viewers, contemporary records talk about viewers who were terrified. They found it quite more than just an aesthetic experience, if you will. Okay. And now, a quick comparison with Andrea Montanya and Giulio Romano's works. So Andrea Montanya's work, very rational, very calm, very ordered, very balanced. Giulio Romano's chaotic, turbulent, unbalanced, but both of them use illusionism. Both of them have the ceilings and the walls conceived of as an integral composition. It would not be fair to these works, to the artists who conceived of them, to address only the ceilings and not the surrounding walls and the spaces in which they're located, because those are integral to understanding the illusionism of the ceilings. Okay, with that, I finish, and I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm really, oh, stop. Okay, for some reason I can't hear anything.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Just 1 second.
Okay. Should I just start looking at the questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think we have even Anupam Sah on call now.
Okay, great. So Anupam, do you want to pick a few questions first?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I think we have a few questions. I think we should, pass on the ones. But the first question was that, a general question was that, was Mantegna originally from Mantua?
He was from Padua, not far from Mantua.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's one directly on your screen.
Yeah.
In the giant wall is the.
It just disappeared. Let me see.
Is the giant wall, is the floor only square below the wall, or it's all over the room? In the giant wall, is the floor only square below the wall, or it's all over the room?
So it is a square room. It's a square room with a dome. Okay. It has a square floor. It has straight walls that meet at right angles, and it has a dome above it. But the painting is done in such an illusionistic manner that it appears to be, unless you go and actually look carefully, you can suspend disbelief and you can think you're just surrounded, not really. If you go and look, you'll see the walls. To see the transition between wall and ceiling, not easy.
Right. Regarding the in the Camera Picta, there is regarding the oculus, there is this gentleman of colored origin.
It's a lady. So there, yeah. I'm assuming the question is about that.
Is about whether, yeah. So it's saying like, is there any significance attached, or is it just a person who's an attendee?
Well, in the Gonzaga household, there was a person of color, a woman, one of Barbara's ladies in waiting, I suppose. So we know there was a historical person. It's possible that's the person depicted. In addition, there is one scholar who has has proposed as a source a panegyric written to one of the Roman emperors that uh, talks. I don't remember exactly what the connection was, but there was a suggestion that the person of color and was having them not in a painting as such, but having them in a household for a ruler was a sign of their. I'm guessing. I don't remember exactly. Probably their either their power or their magnanimity, something like that. So there are connections. Most likely, I would think it's a real person because on the floor, I'm sorry, on the walls, you have historical people depicted. So I would guess that was the person who worked in Barbara's household.
Okay. There are some very interesting questions and also one clarification regarding the floor of the Sala dei Giganti.
Yes.
Before I go on to the other questions about, I'll take the floor of the Giganti thing later. Let's finish off the one with the Camera Picta.
Okay.
They're saying, how long did it take to finish the painting?
About 10 years.
And are they all painted in the same manner or one after the other or sometime later, the sequence?
Okay. So it took about 10 years for Mantegna to, maybe 9 years to finish the entire Camera Picta. He would have begun with the ceiling just because that makes sense. I'm sure there is scholarship on which scenes were painted first. I don't know, but it should not be that difficult to find out.
Can I chip in on that?
Sure.
So Mantegna, what he did was he painted the ceiling first. See, when you paint in fresco technique, in fact, there's another question here that talks about what are the paints that he used and how did they last so long? So I'll combine both the answers together, if I may. Mantegna, when he painted this, he began with the ceiling. He began with the ceiling, and then he went towards the court.
Okay.
You know, and then he moved on to other areas. Now, in frescoes, when you paint, because you have to paint one section at a time, you have to remove the rest of the plaster that you put. So if you put a plaster over so much of an area and you paint only my face, you'll have to remove the rest of the plaster today and come tomorrow and paint another one again. So these are known as giornata, as you're aware of. So looking at the giornata, in which way the plaster overlaps the other one, you can actually sequence each one, the sequence of each day of work. Because it takes about 6 hours for the plaster to dry. So you got to finish the painting within 6 hours. So this is how they started painting from there, and then it moves on. And towards later on, as you said, it took a long time for him to finish. Towards the later part of his painting, if you see, the giornata become very, very small. They become extremely small. So then he, maybe, he didn't paint such large sections after that. So that was the sequence how he painted. Regarding the paints, the painting is in the fresco technique, which means there's a fresh lime plaster. So basically sand and lime in a ratio of 1:2.5 or 1:3. And then they apply the pigments on it without any binder. You don't have to put gum or anything in it. It is just that. And the calcium hydroxide, that lime water in the wet plaster, completely wraps up the pigments and hardens. So the pigments become part of the wall. So that is why the frescoes last so long. At the same time, if you saw under the oculus, there is this, the leaves and these other things. They were painted later on a secco, which means after the fresco had dried completely, then he took a binder and he took some pigments and then he painted them. So there are two types. So if you see under the oculus, the pictures that Dr. Nayyar showed you, the leaves and all have fallen apart. The painting there has got abraded. It has flaked off. So that happens with a secco, the dry. Secco means dry. So a secco technique, the paints flake off. With frescoes, there's no flaking because the pigments are part of the wall. The other thing about techniques which this person has asked in this is that, well, that's another thing. Maybe we'll talk about it later. It's about the underdrawings and other things. So Mantegna did use, in fact, Mantegna was so accomplished as an artist that if you see his later works, he also painted on canvas, and you have lots of his works all over the world. His works are in the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. They're in the Louvre. They're in Dresden. He was so confident of his work, his brush strokes, that he often did not make cartoons or the tracing, so to speak, before he painted. He directly took a brush and he painted on the surfaces with carbon black, often bone black. They would burn the bones to charcoal, and that black powder, they would make fine lines with that. Or sometimes he would bistre as a material, sometimes even iron gall ink as a material. So when you do the analysis, a lot of analysis was done for the paintings in the Camera Picta. In fact, restoration of this has started almost Isabel d'Este also, right after the death of Mantegna. Just after that, she had instructed his sons to do some restoration. It started right from the 1506 or something, the restoration started. And a major restoration was done from the 70s to 2000s. In that, there was a period of 80s, 1983 to 86, there was a major restoration done. And then after that earthquake, in 2012 or something, there was an earthquake. Yeah. That was the time when one of the, there was a previous repair, so that wall also, there was a spaccatura, or there was a break in the wall. So at that time, a lot of his technical studies were done on the paintings, and his technique of painting was then analyzed at that time. That's another story. Maybe we could have a chat about that some other time. Going back to the questions, someone has asked that, someone has said that putto in Italian means like these cherubs, and they're saying in Pali putta or putto means sun. Do you think there's any relation between the two with respect to etymology or source of origin?
No idea.
Maybe, no idea, but I think we should ask him. But that's very interesting, that comment, and I think we will not let it pass. We will note it down and we'll get back on this. It's interesting. Yeah. One or two more questions, Reshma, with your permission. Well, somebody's asked if Michelangelo's sculpture of David is also an example of De Sotto in Su. Would you say it is, or it is?
So De Sotto in Su, conceptually, the person's on the right track. It's just that the term De Sotto in Su is used for painting. Okay, it is used for painting, but yes, if you just look at the literal translation, to be viewed from below. Yes, Michelangelo's David was meant to be placed on a rampart of the cathedral. So it was meant to be looked at from below up. So conceptually, you're on the right track. Whether it's just that when we use the term De Sotto in Su for painting, illusionistic painting, it's restricted. But yes, that was definitely meant to be viewed from below. If you view it the way it's exhibited today, that's not the ideal viewpoint at all.
Right. So getting on, we have some more 4 or 5 more questions before we close. Someone said, is there illusionism ceiling examples in churches? Yes, there are lots of churches. So I'll just let that pass here. And do we have evidence of any preparatory sketches, paintings that these artists made for these particular illusions?
Yes. So the answer is yes. Yeah. With Italian painting, the preparatory drawings are usually always there.
So again, the Arab headdress, the keffiyeh, is that reading too much into it? That lady, the attendant who's there.
I don't know
if it is, whether it is Arab or keffiyeh.
But let's put it this way: if there's a black person who was in her household and dressed as per her traditions, if that's what it looks like and that was used at that time from where that person was, there's definitely a connection, if that's the case.
But other than that, there is a person in an Arab headdress, the keffiyeh. So I think
I
that
don't,
is. So
which,
do you have any?
I don't know which figure that is. So
Mhm.
in the camera picta, I can't
In the
place it.
camera picta, yes.
Okay.
In the oculus, there is.
It's
I
not
don't
the
know.
black lady.
Maybe not. Maybe there's something here because this question says directly that there appears to be a person in an Arab headdress.
Okay, I don't know.
In
I
fact,
think more likely it's a woman with a head covering, just a regular head covering.
okay.
But I don't know.
So now we're getting to the Hall of Giants because there are lots of
Sure.
things, a few things related to the head of the Hall of Giants. Um, in the Hall of Giants, you mentioned there are no windows. So they're asking how would they have illuminated the room? And did the method used lead to any deterioration of the paintings?
Okay,
So
so
how did they illuminate the room? And
yeah,
if there was no window to illuminate the rooms, then how
yeah.
did they light up the room?
Okay, so a couple of things here. I don't know the exact answer to that. I'm just going to answer with what I think was the case. It's possible they were, because the location of the room is in a corner, so it's possible two walls had windows which were later walled up, because some of the doors, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, the doors were decorated from the back. So when you shut the door, the illusion was complete. Okay, so it could be that there are actually windows and I don't know. You just open the shutter, it's just that the shutter is painted in keeping with the wall. For the lighting, I don't have an answer to that. I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, the general lighting in these in the chambers was always oil lamps,
Yeah,
candles rather, candles and oil lamps.
yeah.
So these were used, and whether it, because the question is also, did that lead to any deterioration of the painting? Whether it is the Capella Sistina or anything, yes, the soot always got collected on
Yeah.
the roofs, so there was degradation, and then these things are treated over time.
Yeah, but in a place like the Sala dei Giganti, I think it would be very simple to just give a fresh coat of paint at the end. Like you do everything and then because everything is so large scale that when you view it from a distance, let's say it was covered in soot because it was done over 2 or 3 years, I think, the entire room. And remember this, Giulio Romano had a workshop, lots of people working, and he supervised throughout. So there were many, many, many people working. It wasn't just Giulio Romano working by himself and doing stuff. There were cartoons, they were put there, and it was like a factory in a way. So it would have been fast work. It was not. It didn't take the kind of time that Mantegna's did.
Um, and one important question is, could you tell us something about the floor in the Sala dei Giganti?
I'm not sure what I don't have anything to add other than what I said, so I just repeat that very quickly. The current floor is a renovation. The original floor had river pebbles in it. And that's all at least that's all I know, that the original floor had river pebbles. I am guessing, it's an educated guess, that the river pebbles would have been arranged, like the current floor is geometric in pattern. Whereas I would expect Giulio Romano would have put the pebbles in an uneven manner, asymmetric, so that it merged with the walls better, and probably placed, I assume, a few big boulders along the walls and medium-sized little rocks, so it would merge the smoke. But this is a guess. I don't know.
Okay. There's one question regarding what are the pigments made of?
In just normal fresco pigments, I guess.
Yeah. So we're talking about normal fresco pigments, which means the ochres. The terra verde for the green. Also some azurite for the blue. Also some yellow ochre and red ochre. For the secco, they would use something like cinnabar. Black is usually carbon black or bone black. These are the types of pigments. Mantegna also used things like lead lead, lead and tin yellows and cinnabar and copper resonate. He used pigments like that also, but that is more for seco techniques and things.
Yeah, and I don't know how this factors in, but I read somewhere that there's also some walnut oil that he used in the camera picture.
In fact, no, that's a point. In the Camera degli Sposi, this Camera Picta, he has used fresco techniques.
And secco.
He has used secco. He's also used tempera grassa. So you're absolutely right, Reshma. Yes, so there was also tempera grassa that he tried in one section of the painting.
Okay.
And that degradation is reflected in that sense. So one interesting question before we close is, well, there's one that has come in just now. Why are they celebrating the gathering of real people combined with fictional figures? What is the rationale behind it?
Illusionism.
Illusions, okay.
But it's also, if you just look at it in a very basic sense, in those days, to commission a work of art, just a painting, you needed money. So commission a work like that, needed a whole bunch of money. And everything is to enhance the prestige of the person who has given the commission, basically. And including the putti is more than just increasing the prestige. It's kind of elevating them, not to the level of a divinity, but as a family that is very to be very crude about it, as a family that is above everyone else. I mean, it's like you have the company of the emperor, the king of Denmark, and also there are these putti that carry this inscription.
Right. And so the last question before we close is, do we have any such illusionist art locally to compare?
I'm sure we do. In the museum, Anupam?
In the museum, I mean, if you go 2000 years back to Ajanta paintings, if you see the perspective and things there, I mean, so it is about creating this illusion of depth, and it's about creating this. So yes, there are illusionist painting, though not exactly in this sense, because this is a completely different genre. But yes, you have such illusionist art in India. You have them in various places, and wall paintings. And in fact, this illusionist art is more for architectural decoration.
So let me also just say this. If you just look at the word illusionism, it's basically depicting something that isn't exactly there. Okay? And if you think of religious Indian Hindu art, the temples, everything is illusionistic because you see it's narrative usually, but you're being basically transported into
another world.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an example I'm not getting right now, which would. Okay, let me. Gharapuri, Elephanta. You enter Elephanta. Okay. Initially, what happens? It's bright outside. You can't even figure out what's inside because it's so dark. Slowly, your eyes get used to what's there, and what you see, enormous
sculpture,
the Trimurti, right? And I would call that also an illusionistic experience, because it's not just you go and you see a carved sculpture. It's an experience in a way, and that is illusionism in a way. And now think about, if you put yourself back to whenever that was made, it takes you time to go a boat and you get there, you climb up that little hill, and then you enter. So things like that, the illusionism is enhanced by the entire experience of going to view. Also, you go, if you're religious, you go with that mindset of prayer. Now, I don't know enough about Indian art to give you specific examples, but I'm sure there are.
Yeah, but that's a good point, illusion and the various levels of illusion. But in terms of specifically in terms of this type of work, yes, there are. If you go to the various churches and cathedrals in India, you will find attempts for such illusionism on ceiling paintings also in India, yeah, in different places. And illusionism, and then it's a question of other. If you see miniature paintings in India, you have that illusion of cities, cityscapes and all, but that is coming more under the category of perspective and the way your treatment of the landscape is, or the treatment of architectural fabric is. So that way. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will call it a lovely morning today on this. And for your request that can this be put up on YouTube, I think both the Italian Cultural Center and the CSMS will be putting it up on their separate YouTube channels. And be in touch with us and we will inform you. We have Correggio, Michelangelo, Karachi. We have so many people coming over the next few days, ladies and gentlemen. So April 3rd, it's going to be dome frescoes in the cathedral and the church of San Giovanni Evangelista in Parma with Reshma Nayyar. Thank you very much. Thank you, Francesca Amendola, the director of the Italian Cultural Center. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, Samiksha from the CSMVS, and Rashmi Aisle for organizing this for us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you. It's been a beautiful audience. Thank you very much for being with us. We see you on April 3rd. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody,
Bye-bye
for joining.
now. Thank you.
Bye.
That was good, Reshma. Thank you so much. Bye. Samiksha, will you close it, please?
Sure.
Thank you.